Nicole.
There's not enough to call it a suicide.
Tonight, 2020's investigation lighting a fire under an 8-year-old cold case.
The family's strongest argument is this abrasion.
Follow along as we retrace Annie's final hours, far from home.
So Annie might have been here on Halloween night.
No stone left unturned, doing the job they say the police didn't.
They treated this evidence like trash.
From a pastry shop.
She goes, "Oh my gosh, that's her. She was here."
To a funeral home.
We always thought murder right away.
The Capitol to the state penitentiary.
Our first question was, did you kill our daughter?
And finally, the police, with nothing new to say to the parents, but talking to 2020.
What do you say to this family who says you didn't do your job, that you left them hanging?
Answers for Annie.
Good evening, I'm Elizabeth Vargas. David is on assignment tonight. At a time when so many of you have your children home for the summer, these parents have a never-ending mission. Still trying to find out what happened to their teenage daughter, how she died 8 years after the fact. 8 years after the police say they do know what happened. What will you decide tonight? Join the conversation. We're live on Facebook and Twitter as Deborah Roberts tries to find answers for Annie.
Alexandria, Virginia, a stone's throw from the nation's capital. An upscale suburb in Fairfax County with historic cobblestone streets, pleasant homes, and top-notch schools like West Potomac High. On Vantage Drive, it was the picture of tranquility until early Halloween morning in 2008.
And then this is Annie's room.
Is it hard to come in here?
No, it's joyful because it's Annie.
It was barely 6 a.m. and Dan McCann was saying goodbye to his 16-year-old daughter, Annie, before heading off to his managerial job with TSA in D.C. His wife, Mary Jane, a former White House IT worker and now stay-at-home mom, was on her way to upstate New York to visit the couple's son, Sam, in college. Annie, a high school junior, was a passionate artist and good student who played basketball and made her mom laugh.
Annie was funny, quirky, witty.
She was just a delight. She was just a person that I feel like everybody liked Annie.
Former classmate China Johnson Owens first met Annie in 7th grade.
Annie McCann was an angel on earth, honestly.
Her parents say Annie was young for her age, sheltered and a homebody. There was no Snapchat or Instagram yet, and the McCanns heavily monitored their daughter's time online.
She could barely work a flip phone, and she just got her Facebook account.
So I said, yes, you can have a Facebook account, but I get to look at it when I want. I want the passwords, everything.
What's here that she did?
It wasn't an issue since Annie preferred drawing and painting anyway.
That is really pretty, though.
Look at the colors.
Her work decorating the family home.
She was talented.
Very, very much so. Always put everything in a frame for her so she knew that it was important.
Her big obsession was capturing her cherished dog, Breezy Max.
She absolutely loved her dog, Breezy.
That's
and
a
he's
painting.
At the top of...
I actually thought that was a photo for a
No.
second.
Annie's artistic touch even extended to Halloween with goodie bags she insisted on making.
She was too old to trick-or-treat, so she transferred her enthusiasm into giving the gifts out.
But just hours before trick-or-treaters would arrive, the first hint of trouble. Annie hadn't phoned her mom, something out of character.
Oh, she always called me like clockwork after school.
Mary Jane knew her daughter's routine. Straight home after school, and if neither mom nor dad were home, she'd call. Up in Ithaca, New York at Sam's college, when Mary Jane didn't get that usual ring of reassurance, she worried.
You know, as a mom, you just know. I got this gut. Something's not right. And so I called a neighbor. I said, are any signs of Annie? No. Any signs of the car? No.
Annie used the family's white Volvo to get to and from school.
Thoughts going through my mind, oh my God, what if she's, and you're thinking, what if she's, oh my God, what if she's in a car accident? Please God, let her be okay.
A panicked Mary Jane calls Dan, who rushes home and finds the house phone ringing. Would it be Annie or someone who knows where she is?
I answer, and it's an automated message from the Fairfax County Public School System. reporting that your son or daughter was absent today, the whole day. I almost collapsed.
So now you realize she was never even at school.
Right. So I call the police. Get over here now.
There's little to go on, and the Fairfax County officer who arrives isn't overly concerned. Maybe this is a typical teen acting out.
People were saying, don't worry, she just ran away, she'll be back. Kids do this all the time. It's not uncommon. Don't worry about it.
But Mary Jane is worried. Her daughter is far from rebellious and only recently had gotten her ears pierced. She's diligent about keeping them clean with a first aid spray Bactine. Keep that in mind. You won't believe how important it will be later. With no sign of Annie, her mom is frantic and begins making the achingly long 6-hour drive back home to Virginia.
What state are you in as you're driving?
I know I drove right through somebody's farm and finally got on some highway. I mean, we were like just stunned in the car and, driving fast and not stopping and like, why can't I get this car home faster? We have to find Annie.
We didn't know where the hell to go. We didn't know what to do. We did the best we could.
How did you get through that first night?
I don't know.
It was torture, wasn't it?
It was torture, yeah.
But the torment is only beginning.
When the call came in, I was told it was a dead junkie behind a dumpster.
Not even 48 hours later, homicide detective Sean Jones responds to a call.
I really honestly thought it would be a 20-minute, type it up and be done. Not so much.
But the call isn't in Alexandria, it's here. The Perkins Homes housing project in Baltimore, Maryland, 50 miles and another world away from the McCann's bucolic neighborhood. And behind a dumpster in this section of the so-called Charm City, a man taking out the trash makes a gruesome discovery. And it's no junkie at all.
So you find the body of a white teen girl at a predominantly black housing project. What was your first thought?
That it was a homicide. It was a homicide. And we treated it as such.
Jones, a 25-year veteran Baltimore cop, knows right away this is an unusual case.
When you first looked at her, was there an apparent cause of death?
No.
Did it look like she had been beaten up?
No.
The Perkins Homes covers several square blocks in a high-crime area, just minutes from Baltimore's famed Inner Harbor and Camden Yards. Soon enough, Detective Jones discovers that the dead girl has a backpack nearby and papers that reveal a stunning fact. She's not from Baltimore, not even close.
I find a hall pass for Fairfax County High Schools. I find her driver's license. And I have people back at the office call the Fairfax PD.
A half hour later, the identity is confirmed. It's Annie McCann. Detective Jones leaves the ugly crime scene, driving to suburban Virginia to break the news to the McCanns in person.
How as a parent do you even...
You can't. You're in shock.
Do you ask any questions at this point, or are you just collapsed in grief?
You're collapsed in grief.
How did a sheltered girl from the suburbs wind up here? Amazingly, Annie McCann herself may have left behind the biggest clue. When we come back, the note found in Annie's bedroom. Is it a roadmap to what or who led to her demise?
She'd say, Dear Mom and Dad. She'd never write a note not saying Dear Mom and Dad.
What does it reveal? See what happens next. Nightfall in Baltimore, trapped between a dark harbor and sinister sky. A city with a long history of murder and mystery ever since Edgar Allan Poe wrote and died here. Now it's the case of Annie McCann that captivates. How does a white 16-year-old girl from the Virginia suburbs wind up dead here in the projects? Her stunned parents haunted this Halloween night by a note left on their daughter's bed.
This morning I was going to kill myself, but I realized I can start over instead. If you really love me, you'll let me go.
What started as a suicide note was beginning to sound like a runaway note. Goodbye.
I know I'm only 16, but I'm almost 17. I'll be careful. That's how that note ended. I'll be careful.
Why would she run away? Was there something brewing that maybe...
Well, apparently.
But was there something possible that you could look back on and think, maybe she was upset about this?
No. Dan called me and told me, and I'm like dropping the phone like, what?
What, indeed. Equally as confounding is what they will learn later, that Annie had taken $1,000 in cash, money she'd stashed away, all her favorite clothes, even a box of Cheerios. But nothing in the note hints at where she's going.
Did Baltimore make any sense to you? Was there any connection to Baltimore?
No connection to Baltimore. No sense at all. Annie could not even find her way to Baltimore.
There were all sorts of unusual angles to this.
To Washington Post Metro writer Tom Jackman, the mysterious death of a 16-year-old girl is big news.
Beyond the fact that a suburban girl was found dead in the inner city of Baltimore, there's no real explanation for how she died.
You don't see this very often.
No.
It wasn't the usual bill of fare for Baltimore homicide detective Sean Jones either.
90 to 95% of the cases we're dealing with are African American males that are shot on a street corner. I'm obviously going to look at this twice and not just glance over it as your average everyday case.
Then the case seems to crack like one of those famous Maryland crabs. First, police find Annie's Volvo abandoned at a gas station. Then, a tiny clue, a smudge. It's a fingerprint that matches someone already in their database. Could it be Annie's killer?
We had to get the fingerprint processed, and then once we got the name back from the fingerprint, that's when we moved on that.
Turns out the print belongs to a teen boy who says he and some friends came across the car in the projects. He says Annie, face down in the back, is already dead. So, as twisted as it sounds, they dump her body and go joyriding in her car.
So these boys just dumped her body?
Yes, ma'am.
And took the car?
Yes, ma'am.
One young man connected to the group, Darnell Kinlaw. Remember that name because you'll hear it again. But police don't charge him or anyone with assaulting Annie, in part because of the condition of her body. They're certain Annie was not beaten, strangled, stabbed, or shot.
When I initially met the McCanns, I made it very clear that I didn't know what we had, and that the autopsy, 99.9% of the time, is going to give us more clarity on what we're dealing with.
Then the autopsy results are in, and they're a surprise to everyone. Annie had a small amount of alcohol in her blood, but a large amount of something else. Lidocaine.
Lidocaine.
Lidocaine?
100 lidocaine?
It's a drug you may have heard of on those medical shows like Grey's Anatomy.
Nasal speculum and lidocaine.
To finally relieve your pain, now's the time for lidocaine.
It's also a common numbing agent in all kinds of over-the-counter products, including Bactine.
Relieves pain on contact. Bactine.
The antiseptic Annie had for her newly pierced ears.
Did you even know what Bactine was at that point?
Yeah. I have kids myself. I knew exactly what it was. And I knew what the active ingredients were.
But it's there in black and white. Annie died of lidocaine poisoning. Back at that gas station, crime scene investigators find what in any other case might be an innocuous piece of trash. But now Detective Jones considers it a smoking gun.
We found near the car a Bactine bottle that had the lid removed. It's not a screw-top bottle. It's something that requires a little bit of force to get off.
And Annie's DNA is discovered on the exposed part of the bottle. The medical examiner who did the autopsy won't guess how the lidocaine got into Annie's system, calling it undetermined. But the seasoned detectives have no doubt it's suicide.
But who kills themselves with Bactine?
People kill themselves. I've been in homicide for 15 years, and they get very creative. And this is just one of those methods.
To the authorities, this was a pretty open and shut case. She died of a lidocaine overdose. Problem is, it's so rare to find that someone died of that kind of overdose that it's going to lead to some questions.
This doesn't add up. This can't be. This is what you came up with, that she drank a bottle of Bactine?
And the McCanns are taking notes on other things that don't add up.
It was sound of the Baltimore police to consider suicide. It is reprehensible to conclude suicide.
They don't buy it, as they explain in an article they later write. If Annie was going to kill herself, they ask, why go all the way to Baltimore to do it? And if she drank that Bactine, why did the police not find her fingerprints on the bottle?
Her prints and our prints should be all over that bottle. Who wipes fingerprints while killing themselves?
And who writes a to-do list like Annie did on her hand if they're planning to end it all, reminding her to do her chores and say her prayers?
We thought it was a baffling mystery. Nobody's heard of anybody overdosing on Bactine, much less a kid from the suburbs who didn't seem to be that unhappy with life. And so we continued to press forward with the story.
And the story was far from over. When we come back, the McCanns are about to get disturbing new details about their daughter's death, not from detectives or the medical examiner. Try the funeral director and why she thinks suicide is out of the question.
We always thought murder right away.
You thought murder right away?
We did.
It's a ritual no parent should ever endure. Dan and Mary Jane McCann buried their daughter Annie a week after her death in this cemetery not far from their Virginia home.
Please get any justice, please, please, please.
But no one is resting peacefully. In a curious and cruel blunder, the McCanns say the medical examiner's office failed to restore 2 of Annie's organs after her autopsy.
Your daughter's heart and brain were not returned to her body?
No. No.
How is that possible?
I don't know. You tell me.
The McCanns are outraged. They say it's unheard of and wonder if the medical examiner could somehow lose their daughter's heart and brain. What else was botched? That's where Diane Downey comes in. We tracked her down at this Alexandria funeral home where she spent 25 years preparing bodies for burial. She says she was unnerved after receiving Annie's.
What did you think?
There's absolutely no way this was a suicide with all the trauma on her body.
Trauma? Dan and Mary Jane say police told them there was none. So what about the goose egg-like bruise on Annie's forehead? So unsightly the McCanns hesitated over an open casket.
I kept going back to the detectives, but they kept dismissing it as, no, they were just minor abrasions.
They were told minor abrasions, no evidence of an assault. And they see this. And so now they're probably really thinking there's something more here.
Downey was reluctant to share her suspicions with the grieving family. But the McCanns' heartbreak and bewilderment only grew much later when they would get their daughter's autopsy photos.
And I know these are hard for you to look at.
They're convinced they see a cigarette burn on her forehead, a mysterious letter J on her ankle, and worst of all, they think they see signs of a sexual assault.
I was horrified. It's like, oh my God, my daughter was tortured.
The McCanns suspect that their daughter is a victim of a crime, especially when that funeral director points out what she sees as another bizarre detail: Annie's fingers. It looks to her that they're wilted.
Her fingers were shriveled like they were raisins, like her body had been soaked for several hours.
Did that concern you?
Very much.
Was this a result of someone trying to wash away evidence?
Baltimore City Police will not reopen its investigation.
The case is closed.
Police may be standing down, but the McCanns are only ramping up their own investigation, and the media is all over the story.
The McCanns have made it known they were not happy with their daughter's death investigation.
And the parents are relentless.
The police do nothing and they sweep it under.
Baltimore police never honestly investigated Annie's death.
They begin emptying their savings, even Annie's college fund, to get at the truth, buying billboards around town, and then assembling their own dream team, starting with perhaps America's most famous medical examiner, Dr. Michael Baden, a fixture on Fox News.
You looked through the materials. What struck you right away?
What struck me right away was the circumstances first, that she was found by a dumpster. Somebody dumped the body there after death, and usually that happens in homicidal situations.
Baden says in 50 years of death investigations, he's never heard of anyone killing themselves by drinking Bactine. And in his opinion, there wouldn't be enough lidocaine in one bottle to kill Annie anyway.
So you were convinced that Annie McCann did not commit suicide by drinking Bactine?
That was my opinion, yes.
That's when it went, for me personally, it went, holy cow, she was murdered.
Still, no change in posture for the Baltimore police.
If you come across being angry, no one's going to help you. You come across, if you're nice, no one's going to help you.
Disappointed and desperate, the McCanns march on, all the way, in fact, up to Capitol Hill.
This committee
To Senator Charles Grassley, one of the country's most powerful members of Congress, chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee.
If I can help, I want to help.
From Iowa, he isn't even the McCann senator, but they don't call him Hawkeyes for nothing.
Do you think the Baltimore PD blew it?
It looks to me like when they don't answer questions, they raise a lot of unnecessary suspicion. And if they want to avoid this suspicion, then it's pretty simple. Just come clean.
Grassley sent off official letters to the Baltimore police and the FBI. They wrote back defending the investigation and stand by the conclusion Annie most likely died from self-ingestion of Bactine. But Grassley also wrote to the makers of Bactine, the Bayer Corporation, and got another story entirely.
What exactly did you hear from Bayer about lidocaine?
Pretty simple, that one bottle of Bactine would not cause a suicide.
In fact, Bayer claims it previously told the Baltimore police the same thing.
Back in here.
Her body was found back in here?
Yep, right in here.
Which leads us to this man, the captain of the McCann Dream Team.
It's not your usual death. This is a mystery that stumped everybody. I mean, there's other
Jim Consis, a private eye and former Baltimore cop himself, now on Annie's trail.
Her name's Annie, white girl from Virginia. No, her.
He retraced his steps with us.
I canvassed the whole area, went door to door for months.
Literally walking me through his investigation.
Hey, guys.
Approaching anyone and everyone he could, like these folks at the Perkins homes.
So we're just trying to fill in the blanks on how the body got behind the dumpster.
But have you ever heard of anybody talking about the case? No?
Did you hear any scuttlebutt about it when you moved in? Like
No.
What might have happened to her?
No.
Then hitting the road.
Now we're getting in the heart of Fells Point.
So Annie might have been here on Halloween night.
Yeah, she could have been.
The key for Consis, determining where Annie was after leaving home and with whom.
What would this area be like on Halloween?
Packed, because all the bars are down there.
In fact, Fells Point is one big party on Halloween, with throngs of young people celebrating and taping the festivities. This footage shot the very night Annie disappeared. Consis says Annie may have been among the revelers. Then a big moment on this quiet block of Albemarle Street.
This is basically Little Italy. You got all the Italian restaurants here.
He arrives here, Vaccaro's, a Baltimore bakery famous for its pastries. When we come back, a very sweet clue, and the trail doesn't end in that bakery. Who are the McCanns about to question inside this prison? Stay with us. Vaccaro's pastry shop is a landmark in Baltimore's Little Italy.
He wants an espresso.
Famous for cappuccino and cannoli, it would become the setting for a stunning development in the case of Annie McCann.
What brought you here?
I know she had a sweet tooth, and her body was found over there. And she loved yogurt, pastries, and I'm thinking, why not take a shot?
It's 3 months after Annie's death, and the McCann family private investigator Jim Consis is showing Annie's picture to workers here.
So you came up to the counter here?
Yeah, I came up to counter.
A clerk takes a look at the picture.
One guy goes, "Oh yeah, I think I remember her. Yeah, she was cute."
Then a server sees the photo, and it's as if someone dropped a pile of dishes.
Oh my gosh! Oh my gosh! I can't believe it. That's her.
Remember her?
She was here.
Here, alive and well, sipping a cappuccino with extra whipped cream. Then a jaw-dropping revelation. Annie was not alone.
Yeah. She was with another girl. And then that's when the description came out.
A sketch artist is soon giving that description a face.
So you got the server here to give you the details to come up with a sketch.
Right, and then once the sketch was complete, she looked at it and she says, "That's her."
This is Annie's companion, according to a waitress. A haunting image of a tall, dark-haired woman, older than Annie, late teens, early 20s, disheveled, tired, looking like trouble.
She had heavy makeup. She had the ugliest fingernail polish you would ever see. It's puke yellow. Puke yellow. She had heavy-duty bags underneath her eyes, like she was tired.
As a detective, what's going on in your head at this moment?
I'm thinking, that's good. I got a hit.
Do you think this woman could be the key to solving this death?
Right.
This is big stuff, isn't it?
No, it ultimately does not have anything to do with Annie's death.
Sean Jones, the lead Baltimore detective on the case, says they looked into it, and he is not impressed. Not by the sighting of Annie, not by the mystery woman with her.
But if she's sitting and having coffee or a dessert with a disheveled young woman, that doesn't set off any bells for you?
Of course it does. It's important, but ultimately we weren't able to verify that it even happened.
The McCanns also released this sketch of a woman seen with Annie in Little Italy the day before her death.
The McCanns publicized the sketch, hoping someone will recognize the girl with puke-colored fingernails, one person who might possibly be able to shed light on their daughter's death. There have been many leads over the years, but they've never been able to track her down.
Every time they would find a lead, then they'd, hit a dead end, and it's like the mystery continues.
Just when many might have given up, the case of Annie McCann takes another strange turn. Nearly 3 years after her death, a murder with what seemed to be eerie parallels makes the news in Baltimore. 26-year-old Lakeisha Player is murdered and her car stolen. When police name the killer, the McCanns are flabbergasted.
Police believe the killer is this man, 21-year-old Darnell Kinlaw.
Darnell Kinlaw is accused of murdering Lakeisha Player in her Kentucky Avenue home this month and stealing her car.
The same Darnell Kinlaw previously questioned in Annie's case, and who the McCanns believe had been involved in tossing their daughter's body and taking her Volvo on that joyride.
That same guy then gets arrested for murdering someone and taking their car. It's a big coincidence.
Annie's case comes roaring back into the headlines.
The arrest was of 21-year-old Darnell Kinlaw for the murder of his girlfriend. Kinlaw was eventually charged with the unlawful taking of Annie McCann's car in 2008.
Awfully close to the same kind of circumstances.
I'd argue otherwise. He shot her and stole her car in a domestic incident. Has no similarities to Annie's case.
Do you think he knows more than he's told you?
No. As a matter of fact, I think that it tells the opposite, that if he were to murder someone, he's going to use a gun. He's going to use the standard method, and that he's not going to poison someone with lidocaine.
For years, the McCanns have wanted to question Kinlaw themselves, convinced they might be able to get something more out of him about Annie's death. Now, on a gray June day, nearly 8 years after Annie's death, they will get their chance. Kinlaw has surprisingly agreed to meet with them. Dan and Mary Jane leave their Fairfax County home for the nearly 3-hour ride across Maryland.
Are you nervous?
No.
Oh, yeah. Because I know that we might not get anything.
Yeah, that's what I fully expect. They might accidentally tell the truth or do it on purpose. We're going to interview one of what we believe are 5 thugs, at least 4, and we believe 5, who dumped Annie's dead or dying body from her car and then took the car for a joyride. Give us this day our daily bread and forgive us our trespasses.
Praying as they drive and strategizing.
We want to know the circumstances under which he found the car, found Annie. Had he seen her before? Had he seen her with anybody else? And can he please find it in his heart to help us find out who, not him, murdered our beautiful daughter.
Coming up, are the McCanns face-to-face with their daughter's killer? Does Darnell Kinlaw have answers about Annie? Watch what happens next.
"2020 continues with Answers for Annie."
Dan and Mary Jane McCann drive 150 miles across Maryland, doing the kind of detective work they say the Baltimore police are not. They're going to question Darnell Kinlaw, a young man they believe was involved in dumping their daughter's body and joyriding in her car in Baltimore nearly 8 years ago. Kinlaw's now doing 30 years for murdering his girlfriend, Lakeisha Player, and taking her car.
That takes a lot of guts. For these parents to walk into a maximum security prison and sit down and interview a man who they think may have killed their daughter?
He was on the other side of thick glass. We could hear each other very well.
They make small talk with the killer and even pray together.
And I said, Darnell, I take it from your letter, you're Christian. And he said, yes. I said, would you mind if we started with a prayer? And he said, no. And he joined us.
Then Dan gets down to brass tacks.
Our first question was, this is maybe the hardest question we're going to ask you, DJ, or maybe the easiest. Did you kill our daughter? No. You know, we had to ask, okay.
They say Kinlaw seemed genuinely upset at times, but as he looked into their heartbroken faces, they say he offered nothing that would end their misery.
Nothing. So we've worked a long time to get to see Darnell Kinlaw. Finally got to, and we got pretty much what we expected, which is nothing. We learned that he knows almost nothing about Annie's death.
Weary after struggling nearly 8 years now to prove that their daughter didn't take her own life, the McCanns' anger toward the Baltimore police is as raw as ever. We questioned lead detective Sean Jones about the McCanns' accusations, and we also confronted his boss, Colonel Stanley Branford.
The McCanns say that the Baltimore Police Department took the easy way out. By labeling this a suicide, they were able to wash their hands of it and move on to another crime.
I'm sorry that they feel that way, but that's simply not the way we approach this case. I can tell you that this case has been thoroughly investigated, not only by us, by the FBI, that we asked to come in and evaluate our investigation.
Doesn't this family deserve more answers?
We've given them all we can give. We cannot provide answers that we do not have. We possibly believe that Annie McCann committed suicide.
Suicide. But this is a girl who lived in the suburbs. Why would she drive 50 miles to a housing project in Baltimore to commit suicide?
Well, that I can't answer because I don't know the mindset of Annie at that time.
But police do share stunning evidence with us the McCanns did not. We already knew about the letter Annie wrote saying she was going to kill herself and changed her mind. But now police revealed their investigation found other notes in which Annie talks about suffering with anorexia and depression. She writes to a friend, "My suicide has nothing to do with you." In another note, "Pressure has gotten to me. I can't do it anymore." And no one blamed themselves for this. This is all on me.
In all of her writings, she had indicated that she was leaving, and she expressed to some degree that she was tired of living.
In response, the McCanns insist Annie did not intend those as suicide notes. One was found crumpled up under her bed, the other partly crossed out.
Now, my heart goes out to her parents. We have responded to every request that they made. We responded to every piece of information that came in.
After 1,200 hours on the case, the Baltimore Police Department stands by its belief that Annie took her own life by drinking Bactine. It's a critical question at the core of Annie McCann's death. Is there enough lidocaine in a single 5-ounce bottle of Bactine to kill a 16-year-old girl? The McCanns' medical experts are at odds with the Baltimore ME. So 2020 contacted Dr. Bill Mannion, a board-certified forensic pathologist. He estimates he's determined cause and manner of death in 2,500 cases over the years, but not one of them involved Bactine or lidocaine.
Bactine, I had never heard of that before. To be honest, I didn't know it was capable of killing you, but it is capable because it has lidocaine in it, and lidocaine is a toxic drug.
He says a bottle of Bactine does contain a potentially fatal dose of lidocaine.
Yes, there is enough in a bottle of Bactine to kill someone. Even in a half a bottle, they're roughly 2 grams, and that would be enough to cause death.
Even the McCanns' own expert, Dr. Bodden, says some of their worst fears about what happened to their daughter are unfounded.
The funeral director felt convinced that she saw signs that Annie might have been sodomized. Did you see any indication of that in either the photos or in any of the material you reviewed?
No, I didn't. Well, I don't see evidence that she was sexually assaulted.
As for that distinctive-looking letter J on Annie's ankle, Dr. Bodden says it may just be an accidental pattern from blood settling.
It was the way the blood settled in the body after she had died.
So you don't think that was a marking, a letter, some kind of a tattoo?
That's correct.
You don't think so?
I do not think so.
There's also some talk that there may have been a cigarette burn on her head.
But I don't think it was a cigarette burn.
You don't think that was another sign of some kind of abuse?
No.
On one of our visits with the McCanns, they show us bins of evidence they say the police returned to them.
How long has it been since you've gone through these things?
Years.
And there, among Annie's things, a discovery that seems to surprise even her parents.
She didn't take that from me.
Digital camera.
Her digital camera still sealed in a police evidence bag. Is it possible this has gone untouched and unnoticed for nearly 8 years? Mary Jane plugs the memory card into a laptop. When we come back, what Annie's camera saw. Stay with us. Nearly 8 years after Annie McCann's strange death in Baltimore, her parents do something they say they've never done before: search the memory card of her camera, stored among evidence in their garage. This is what they find: 14 photos, apparently taken by Annie.
It says May 2008.
But the pictures couldn't be more innocent. Later, Baltimore police tell us they checked that camera years ago. Yet another disappointing dead end. But the McCanns are determined to keep fighting.
Her death needs to be changed to homicide.
The McCanns feel that the Baltimore PD botched this case. Did you botch it?
No, ma'am. Not at all.
What if you're wrong? What if there's a murderer out there and you missed it?
I'm not.
You're convinced that this is a suicide?
Yes, ma'am.
No doubt in your mind?
None whatsoever. There is absolutely no evidence to indicate that this is a murder.
Recently, Mary Jane took another road trip. An emotional journey to Baltimore.
We're gonna go meet Wanda Player. She was just a really very special lady.
That special lady Wanda is Lakeisha Player's aunt. The McCanns bonded with her when the two families were attending court appearances for Lakeisha's killer, Darnell Kinlaw.
A young mother on the verge of a new beginning.
She always used to talk about her wedding. She had everything planned out.
She was going to be living the life that she's always dreamt of having.
Violently struck down.
Not just homicide, but an act of rage.
I had no idea why somebody would want to do that.
Police chase a deranged killer down a sinister path.
He was a big heroin dealer in Jackson. Someone burnt the house down.
Through a maze of twisted theories.
Maybe this was a retaliation.
It was probably self-induced.
You mean suicide?
Yeah.
Until the case takes a mind-bending turn.
He looked at me and said, "You have it all wrong."
That person never was on our radar.
Just an epic tragedy.
I was almost in disbelief.
That's just something that was entirely unexpected from the beginning.
Until we try to rule them in or rule them out, I don't know that any of us are safe.
Middle-class neighborhood in Jackson, Michigan. A quiet morning is broken by a desperate phone call.
Our dispatch did receive a 911 call from a panicked individual.
911.
Yeah, I need somebody up to my house right now. My fiance, I think she's dead.
Okay, so has she been sick?
No, there's blood everywhere.
Do you know where it's coming from?
I don't know.
Okay, can you tell if she's breathing?
She's not. She's cold. She's dead. Oh my God.
Police race to the home just before 11 a.m., where they're greeted by the caller and 3 young girls.
He had said that the deceased body was up in a bedroom upstairs. There was 2 bedrooms that we walked past, which were bedrooms where the kids had been sleeping.
With the 3 children who lived there safely out of the house and the crime scene locked down, detectives come upon a grisly sight.
As we enter the bedroom, then we do see the body. It was slumped down between the bed and the wall. And there was quite a bit of blood. At that point, we see zip ties on her hands. and we see what appears to be several stab marks.
A zip tie was wrapped around each wrist, with another looped through it and cut, as though she'd been strapped to the bed and then cut loose.
We, at that point, determined we likely had a homicide.
The police talked to Eric Wolf, who placed the 911 call. He tells them the victim is his fiancée, 28-year-old Frances Craig. He also makes a startling admission.
He said that he had worked all night, so when he came home, he, after finding Franny in the condition she was in, he then went downstairs and slept on the recliner chair. For whatever reason, he did not call 911 until a couple hours later in the morning.
Frances's 2 daughters and Eric's little girl were all in the house at the time. While Eric slept, his 10-year-old child walked into a horrifying scene.
Eric's daughter, Lexi, went into the bedroom and clearly could tell that something was amiss. She even touched her and could tell that she was not moving. I think she might even have described her as a little cold.
Lexi went downstairs and woke up her father. And that's when he finally called 911.
We all felt that a normal, average individual would, at the bare minimum, make sure their fiance, the person they're about to get married to and spend the rest of their life with, is okay.
Eric's decision to walk away from the murder scene is a red flag for investigators. And so is his casual demeanor.
When Eric was interviewed by one of the other detectives at the scene initially, the detective said he didn't seem too concerned, didn't seem too upset about what had happened.
Detectives plan to grill Eric about his suspicious behavior. But first, they need to finish processing the crime scene.
There was approximately 90 stab wounds, and they were in a very aggressive manner.
It was overkill. Not just committing a homicide, but an act of rage where it's over the top.
The rule of thumb is on a situation where there's multiple, and I'm talking more than a dozen stab wounds, it's usually a crime of passion. So at that point, you typically look at somebody close to the victim.
Investigators sift through the bloody mess for clues. There's no sign of a murder weapon, but plenty of signs of conflict.
The crime lab, which is the CSI people, they responded to the scene. They were there for multiple hours collecting a ton of evidence.
While the forensics team works the scene inside, shocked friends and family have gathered outside the house.
I didn't believe her. I thought it was a lie. It's not real. It didn't happen.
I had no idea why somebody would want to do that. Frances was just an amazing person all around. Frances and I worked together. We hung out outside of work together. We would hang out with our kids.
Investigators learned that Frances had 2 daughters with an ex-boyfriend. The oldest is 5 years old, and the youngest is 3.
Our boyfriends actually were friends, and he brought her to my house one day, and that was like the beginning of a beautiful friendship. It felt like we've known each other for years. She's a wonderful, amazing mom, the best mom that I know. She was the best person I've ever met and known in my life.
She would do anything for anyone.
Frances and the father of her children broke up, but she still dreamed of getting married.
She always used to talk about her wedding and everything, and at this point, she didn't even have a boyfriend. She had everything planned out.
Dreams became reality in 2012 when she started dating 29-year-old Eric Wolf.
Eric was a divorced single father, one young child. He had primary custody over her.
2 years into the relationship, Eric and Frances moved in together. Despite working 2 jobs, Frances did all she could to make time for her children and Eric's daughter, too.
She was constantly doing things with her girls when she wasn't working, even with her stepdaughter. She was amazing.
Her days were long, but her life was full. Eric proposed, and the couple bought a house together.
Frances was very, very excited about getting married. Like, every day she was tagging me on Facebook or, like, sending me pictures. You know, she thought she was going to be living the life that she's always dreamt of having and having that fairy tale wedding.
But when detectives pressed Franny's friends, they learned that Eric had a dark side.
They told me that they weren't super fond of her fiance.
Because my daughter spent a lot of time with Frances. She was like a second mother to my daughter. And my daughter did tell me several times of Eric being kind of like a drill sergeant. He seemed real cocky, just everything was about him and his daughter more so than Frances and her girls. I felt in my gut from the moment I found out that something happened to Frances, I felt like Eric had something to do with it. I didn't know what, I didn't know how, I didn't know why. I just felt like it was because of him that she's gone.
Police are determined to get to the bottom of Eric's suspicious behavior.
When we interviewed him, he stated when he saw her in the condition she was in, he did not call 911, and he didn't seem too upset about what had happened. At that point, he was somebody, definitely a person of interest in the homicide of Franny Craig.
Coming up, Eric's story gets stranger by the minute.
I didn't know if this was, like self-inflicted accident.
That's what we need to find out too.
A tiny clue reveals a big surprise.
There was DNA found on Franny's zip tie.
And when police find the killer, it shocks everyone.
I remember thinking to myself, I'm glad.
After calling 911 following the brutal murder of his fiancée, Frances Craig, Eric Wolf is questioned by police about how he discovered his fiancée's body.
I came home this morning because I work 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. I went upstairs, I checked both the girls' room before going in our bedroom.
Okay, so you came around to the foot of the bed and kind of looked to see where she was at.
That's exactly what I did.
Okay. Did you see anything on the mattress when you first came in?
I saw, I guess I might have saw that streak, but it didn't jump out like blood or anything.
Okay, so you saw something that just didn't jump out to you.
Yeah, I thought
this is bad.
Eric did not seem to register surprise, anger, hurt, anything that I think we all normally would want to see from a loved one when somebody is killed.
I thought maybe she had been drinking or something because she was in like almost like a funny position on the floor, which she doesn't drink hardly ever. I knew better than to wake her. I know from prior experience whenever I've woken her up, she's not a morning person and I get yelled at.
As the interview creeped close to an hour, Eric suggests a much darker reason for ignoring his fiancée sprawled out on the bedroom floor.
Up until just now, maybe since we've been here, I thought that if it wasn't an accident, then it was probably self-induced.
You mean suicide?
Yeah.
He indicated that he thought maybe she had committed suicide and just did not want to deal with it at that point. We found that being very odd and a red flag. Typically on a suicide, You'll find one stab wound or one gunshot wound. You won't find multiple stab wounds.
The prospect of Franny inflicting 90 stab wounds with her hands zip-tied sounds preposterous to the police. Even if it was physically possible, why wouldn't Eric have reacted with alarm?
So you didn't want to come to grips with it if she had done so. Right, because you don't want you.
To investigators, Eric's shifting story doesn't add up. Why would a woman everyone described as happy and carefree take her own life?
And the only reason I say self-induced is just because of how high-strung everything is right before this wedding, and
it's a lot of stress.
Yeah.
Eric's strange comments could signal that he's traumatized over the death of his fiancée, or that he's hiding something. Determined to mine the truth, detectives decide to go right at their prime suspect.
Did you?
No.
Know what?
No, I didn't do this. I didn't know anything about it. I walked in, and I walked out, went to sleep, got up, went back in, and reported it.
But that brings me back to the questions we just asked. You made it at least halfway into that bedroom.
I did make it, and I admit that, and I'll admit that in front of whoever needs to hear it. But I want to make that perfectly clear that my stance on this is exactly what I said. I went in for whatever reason it was. I didn't react.
Without forensic evidence to hold him, Eric is free to go. But investigators vow to keep their eye on him. And the deeper they look, the more circumstantial evidence starts to build up.
We did do a pretty thorough background, as we always do. And one thing we found out is that Eric did have a little bit of assaultive past with prior girlfriends and an ex-wife. It seems like he has some violent tendencies.
One of the strangest facts in this case is that Eric Wolf has a father who is serving a life sentence in prison for his own first-degree murder conviction.
He was convicted on a cold case homicide investigation in the 90s and was serving life in prison for murder. So that certainly put up a red flag to us.
Was it possible that violent tendencies run in the family? Even if they did, what possible reason would Eric have to want his fiancée dead?
The homicide occurred in August, and I believe their wedding was planned in September. We talked with her parents and her friends. They told me that Franny had second thoughts, and they were trying to convince her that if she was not prepared to get married, that maybe she should wait. And they also said Eric had second thoughts. Eric may have got cold feet, didn't want to get married, didn't know how to end the relationship.
While police work diligently to prove Eric's guilt, Francis's friends wait and wonder.
We didn't know what was going on. Nobody knew what was going on and what happened with Frances and how she was murdered. We just knew she was dead.
Behind the scenes, police work tirelessly. They obtain a search warrant to collect Francis's and Eric's electronics, but quickly realize that Francis's cell phone is missing.
We do find the cell phone near Franny's house. It had been thrown up against a tree and damaged. Again, we're thinking that the cell phone has some pretty valuable information.
The cellular phone data quite often can be some of the most compelling evidence.
We were able to get the phone records, and nothing really stuck out as being her, Franny communicating with anybody that would give us suspicion.
With no unusual cell phone activity or signs of forced entry on the day of the murder, police stay focused on Eric.
Eric Wolf at the time was at work, and investigators went and checked out, what they could to verify his alibi.
Police checked the company's security cameras.
They do have one entrance. They do have a time card check-in, check-out system. We're able to verify he was at work, or allegedly at work, when the incident occurred. The problem with the system is there's some other exits that they're not supposed to use, but some of them have cameras, but other ones do not.
Was he able to leave his place of employment and get home to commit a murder and have all of that be undetected? Eric was the only person we could figure who would have.
Police investigating the homicide of 28-year-old Frances Craig cannot confirm her fiancé's alibi, since not every exit at his workplace had a security camera.
We couldn't rule out that sometime during the night he left and then came back.
Eric's shaky alibi and suspicious behavior at the crime scene doesn't give police enough to arrest him, but it does leave them with a drastic course of action.
If you are operating in a murder investigation thinking that man killed his fiancée in the home where the children were, you are thinking we want to keep the children safe. We kept Eric's daughter from him while we tried to figure out what happened to Franny.
Both Eric's and Franny's daughters are removed from Eric's home and put in the custody of family members. With pressure mounting, detectives need to move fast to prove their theory, or find a more plausible one.
At that point, we tried to determine any communication Franny may have been having with someone other than her fiancé.
Franny had an ex-boyfriend. He no longer lived in the area, but he had returned to the area recently and had some level of connection or interaction with Franny.
The police press Franny's ex. Could he have committed this heinous crime?
That young man was a nice young man, came from a very, very nice family.
And he did have an alibi where he was at the time of the incident. We were able to verify that alibi, so we were able to eliminate him.
If no one in Frances's immediate circle wished her harm, what about her coworkers? Detectives learned that while Frances worked at a retail store, she was involved in a frightening incident.
Where Franny was working, there was a couple shoplifters that had stolen some clothing. She confronted them.
The confrontation turned to violence when the mother of the two young shoplifters jumped in, attacking Frances. The assault left Frances with a severe eye injury, as well as emotional scars.
The incident at work left Frances really scared, nervous, cautious.
The mother of the shoplifters was actually criminally charged for a crime for the assault, some type of unarmed robbery. She was convicted.
So there was some concern that maybe this was a retaliation for that situation.
We did surprise them with a visit. They did have alibis on where they would have been at that time that the incident occurred.
Investigators are able to verify those alibis, eliminating the women as suspects. Frustrated detectives are still hoping that DNA from the crime scene will help them find the killer. But while they wait for results from the crime lab, the people of Jackson attend Franny's funeral, their emotions raw from the news of her violent death.
Her mail carrier showed up to her funeral because she left such an impact on that person. That's how loved and how missed Frances Craig is.
This was definitely a shock to the community because we don't have that many homicides.
I was scared. I just didn't know what to expect.
I was afraid to leave the house. I was afraid to do anything because we still had no answers as to what happened.
The overwhelming feeling was the pressure we were under to get this right.
Determined to find justice for Franny, investigators continue to drill down on Francis's fiancée. Hoping for an inside look at Eric Wolf, they bring in one of the couple's former roommates.
Ryan Marshall was friends with Eric Wolf. So Eric and Franny welcomed Ryan into their home to stay with them.
His house had caught on fire, and she was trying to help a friend out.
He lived with them until April of 2014. The homicide happened August of 2014, so he had a pretty good knowledge of the two of them. He said everything was good, and he actually vouched for Eric, saying Eric was a really good guy and a friend for a long time, and doesn't feel that Eric would ever do anything to harm Franny.
Speaking with Ryan doesn't give police new reasons to suspect Eric, but it doesn't clear him either.
3 months in, we've pretty much eliminated everybody of interest, anyone close to Franny other than Eric. But we don't have enough evidence to present to the prosecutor.
But then, a new piece of information arrives that brings a new suspect into the spotlight.
There was DNA found on Franny's zip tie.
After Francis Craig's murder, the lab results from the crime scene finally arrive. And they provide a huge break in the case.
We're notified through a national index. The DNA located on the zip ties matched DNA in a database.
When somebody commits a felony, they have to submit to a DNA test. Somebody's DNA showed up on the zip ties that were used in the homicide. We get a name of Cortez Butler.
Who is Cortez Butler? Police waste no time looking into his criminal record.
We find out Cortez Butler served approximately 25 years for murder and was currently on parole in the Detroit area.
But we knew almost nothing else. We tried to determine if we could connect Cortez Butler to Franny Craig, to Eric Wolf, and we came up with nothing. We tried to determine if he had family locally, and we came up with nothing.
In fact, Cortez Butler appears to have no connection to Jackson whatsoever.
So we look in our database to see if we have any Cortez Butlers in any police report we've done, any place in Jackson County, and we find none.
Then it was this mad scramble of, well, then how do we even tie Cortez Butler to this? For all we know, he may have worked at Home Depot, and his DNA may be on these zip ties for a completely innocent reason.
The investigators connected with Cortez's parole officer. They got Cortez's phone number. A search warrant was prepared and signed for Cortez Butler's phone records. We learned that Cortez Butler's phone was in Jackson on the early morning hours of August 10th, the actual time of the murder. The rest of those phone records almost exclusively placed it in and around the greater Detroit area, never in Jackson.
But what reason would Butler have to harm Franny?
Eric remained the prime suspect. He was the only dude with a motive.
Maybe Eric was not ready to get married and didn't know how to end a relationship.
So then the thought process was, did Eric hire this person to kill Franny?
The cell phone records also connect Butler to some other shady characters.
We were able to identify a Clifford and Rodney McKee as being connected to Cortez Butler. Clifford McKee lived in the Detroit area. Clifford McKee was in prison for approximately 20 years for murder. We found out that Rodney McKee, he was a big heroin dealer in Jackson. We found out that he had committed arson.
The arson that Rodney McKee perpetrated was against Donna and Ryan Marshall.
The police are stunned. Ryan Marshall is Eric Wolf's friend, the one who had been welcomed into Franny and Eric's home after his house burned down. But what kind of a connection could Ryan possibly have to a drug dealer like Rodney McKee?
Ryan Marshall's mother had been a heroin dealer for Rodney McKee.
But after months of dealing for Rodney, Ryan's mother decided she wanted out.
Donna Marshall refused to sell heroin for Rodney McKee.
Rodney didn't like to be told no.
Ryan's mother, Donna, held her ground, but Rodney retaliated.
Rodney McKee attempted to burn down a house with Ryan Marshall and his mother in it.
Ryan witnessed it all. He then contacted police.
What was the connection between Eric Wolf, Cortez Butler, the Marshalls, and a drug dealer from Detroit? Detectives knew there was only one person who could answer the question, and soon they'd have a chance to ask him face to face.
Cortez Butler was arrested for yet another murder. Not Franny's murder, but another murder in the greater Detroit area.
We went down there in Detroit with one sole purpose: to gather information from Cortez Butler on what happened to Franny and hopefully be able to explain to us what Eric's role in this whole thing was. But Cortez said he wasn't going to talk without any kind of a deal.
It was clear that whatever Cortez was going to say, it was not.
Investigators have DNA evidence and phone records that link convicted killer Cortez Butler to Francis Craig's murder. They arranged to talk to him while he's detained for an unrelated homicide. But he immediately tries to shut them down.
Cortez said he wasn't going to talk without any kind of a deal. I said, no one is giving you any kind of a deal without anyone knowing what you have to say.
Detectives press Butler hard until he finally agrees to talk. But only on one condition.
Cortez very pointedly and specifically asked repeatedly to not have the interview recorded.
If detectives agree not to record the interview, there's a chance Butler's testimony won't stand up in court. Still, with no other leads in the case, they decide to roll the dice.
We were there interviewing Cortez in the first place because we need to find out Eric Wolf's involvement in this. And it was dire that we did so as the children were about to go back with Eric Wolf. The whole idea for that was to keep these kids safe.
So the detectives tried to read him his rights. He didn't even want to be bothered with the rights. I know my rights. I think it was, bro, I know my rights, bro.
Butler wastes no time getting right to the point.
Cortez looked at me and said, "You have it all wrong." And I said, "Have what all wrong?" And he at that time let us know that Eric had absolutely nothing to do with this murder.
He goes, "I don't know this dude you're talking about, know nothing about him. Just trust me, he was not involved in this whatsoever."
The statement contradicts one of the investigators' strongest leads, but the next thing Butler says is even more explosive.
Cortez identifies himself as the killer. I remember thinking to myself, I'm glad we're sitting down right now, because I was almost in disbelief.
If Eric wasn't involved, why had this cold-blooded criminal murdered a woman to whom he had no obvious connection? It all went back to Rodney McKee's arson case.
Rodney McKee attempted to burn down a house with Ryan Marshall and his mother in it. Ryan Marshall was a key witness in his arson case.
He made some threats to Ryan that either he not agree to testify or he was going to be killed.
Cortez told us that he had been hired by Rodney McKee to kill Ryan Marshall.
First, Butler had to find Ryan, who was homeless because of the fire.
So we found out from Cortez Butler that they had bad information. They had information that Ryan Marshall was living with Francis Craig and Eric Wolf.
Cortez Butler entered Francis and Eric's house to kill someone who was no longer there.
Franny wasn't even the intended target. Franny was as innocent of a victim as anybody could ever be. When he opened the door, he had made the decision that he was killing somebody while he was there.
He doesn't have to force entry. He gets into the house. He noticed the bedrooms have some kids in it. He walks past them, and he goes to Franny Craig's room. When he gets to Franny Craig's room, he asks her where Ryan is. She said he's not there. Cortez tells Franny not to look at him. In his words, he stated she looked at him, so he had to kill her.
The horrific details that Cortez reveals next leave detectives with no doubt about the guilt of the man sitting across from them.
He decided to bind her, trying to get information from her, but she would not cooperate.
Cortez stabbed her multiple times.
We will never know how long he took to torture her and butcher her. And it clearly took time and effort to stab and slice her in the manner that he did. She died in the service of keeping Ryan's identity and his location secret, and/or she quite frankly just didn't know.
Cortez Butler's chilling confession is nothing short of a game changer, both for detectives and for Eric Wolf.
It eliminated our hypothesis that Eric Wolf was responsible for Franny's death.
Eric wasn't involved. He's an odd duck kind of guy.
Eric was able to regain custody of his daughter.
I took from this case that we can never jump to conclusions. I was pretty convinced that he did it, not to the point that I could charge him, but I was pretty convinced I had the right person.
Now that investigators do have the right person, they're determined to put Cortez Butler away for life. But all of that is in jeopardy.
I didn't believe that Cortez's confession would be legally admissible in court because it wasn't recorded. And if Cortez Butler ever walked free again, I don't.
After months of dead ends, investigators finally have a confession from Francis Craig's killer. But prosecutors are concerned that his testimony may not hold up in court.
I was concerned that it would be legally inadmissible because it wasn't recorded. He was basically told, "We're not planning to use this in court against you." I was concerned that he had not been properly advised of his Miranda rights. But we still had his DNA on the zip ties and the cell phone records. So I kept thinking, and I finally got myself legally to a point where I was convinced that we need to give this a shot.
In October of 2015, Cortez Butler is charged with Frances's murder. When the trial begins 6 months later, Butler appears relaxed, almost giddy.
Cortez really seemed to thrive in that trial atmosphere. He would seek out cameras and smile at them, give them this big, full teeth smile.
He wanted to fight just because he could. He wanted to run the show just because he could.
But that's just a warm-up for the verbal assault he launches into when he takes the stand.
Cortez Butler was a monster at that trial. He bragged on how many bodies he had. It was unbearable.
Butler gleefully describes his murderous past in gory detail. But when asked about killing Frances, he fiercely denies it.
He clearly was so excited to say why he didn't commit this murder, because he pleads to all of his murders, and he clearly didn't commit this one because he didn't plead to it.
Butler also denies ever confessing to police. But in a victory for prosecutors, the judge allows detectives to testify about Butler's confession.
We're able to get past that piece because he wasn't in custody for our case. He wasn't actually entitled to his Miranda warnings.
Eyewitness accounts play a major role in trying to move the jury, beginning with Eric's daughter, who found Franny dead.
Alexis was our first witness up there, and I don't know that I will ever forget the audible gasps and sobs and emotion pouring from the jury just from that first witness.
The physical evidence is laid out.
We have Cortez Butler's DNA on the zip ties that were used in the homicide, and we also have phone tracking information showing Cortez Butler and Jackson.
Prosecutors make a compelling case, but without a recording of Butler's confession. It's the detective's word against Butler's. When the jury returns with the verdict, there's no guarantee which way the cards will fall.
Cortez Butler was convicted of first-degree murder, and he won't ever walk free again.
The sentence was life without the possibility of parole for the premeditation murder of Franny Craig.
This was a complicated story to tell to a jury. It is a difficult one for all of us to wrap our brains around, even still.
Cortez goes to look for Ryan at her house, and he doesn't find him, and murders Franny in her own bed while she's doing nothing wrong.
Franny had no connection to her killer whatsoever. We can rest maybe a little easier that the bad guys won't ever hurt anybody else, at least not outside of the walls of prison. But none of it brings Franny back.
Today, Frances's two daughters live with their father. Those closest to Frances do everything they can to hold on to her memory.
Franny's family, I know, they've been lost ever since. I've been lost ever since Frances has been murdered.
I want people to remember how happy of a person she was, how generous, how nice and kind she was.
I miss Frances so much, and there's not a day that goes by that I do not think about her.
March 3rd, 2008, the day they disappear. Elizabeth and John Calvert meet with their former accountant at 6 p.m. The meeting is about the troubled finances of their yachting resort, called Harbor Town, located in picturesque Hilton Head Island, South Carolina.
We have all of the water-related sports here: kayaking, parasailing, tours and cruises, fishing.
They also had a rental property business that they rented out condominiums and apartments.
Until recently, business was going well. When the Calverts acquired Harbortown Yacht Basin in 2005, John, an engineer and boating enthusiast, cultivated a laid-back and friendly atmosphere.
John was in love with the Harbortown Yacht Basin and just loved the people and, trying to come up with ideas to make their experiences more fun. Liz was, behind him and kind of the practical side.
Liz helps John at Harbortown half the week. She also practices corporate law in nearby Savannah, Georgia.
She was a tax attorney, and she thrived in it. She liked understanding the nuances of the tax laws and very much detail-oriented, very much wanted to find out the resolution to a situation.
Liz plans to leave her law practice and work full-time managing Harbortown with John by spring of 2008. They'll keep their houses in Atlanta and Savannah, but live on their yacht docked at the marina.
I think they had life figured out. I think they enjoyed things together and enjoy each other.
At the end of 2007, Liz takes on some accounting duties as part of a gradual transition to her new role managing Harbortown, while John continues catering to the clientele.
I thought, what an amazing team they were going to make.
Until Liz's involvement, Harbortown's bookkeeping had always been handled by an outside company, a local management firm called the Club Group.
They were a hired management company to take care of the financial end. They actually wrote the checks. They were John and Liz's financial arm.
The Club Group's financial and accounting practice is run by 54-year-old Dennis Gerwing, a well-liked member of the Hilton Head community.
John and Dennis had been friends for years. We had worked with Dennis for 20 years.
Although Dennis had already been managing Harbortown's finances prior to the Calverts' acquisition, Liz never felt completely comfortable with him.
Liz was never really one to let other people manage her money, but because the gentleman that was managing the books from her perspective was someone that had been involved with the business before they purchased it, and they had every reason to trust him.
But as Liz eases into her new role, she can't help but notice what seemed like careless accounting errors.
She was starting to go through the books and had uncovered some discrepancies that she couldn't quite explain. And knowing Liz, was going to spend whatever time she needed to try to get to the bottom of it.
They decide that all of Harbortown's accounting should be in-house and under Liz's control by December 31st.
They let the other firm go, at the end of 2007, and then she started in earnest, January 1 of 2008, being the accountant, if you will.
And at first she didn't have any real concerns, but, she just thought that there were some things that needed explanation.
John believes that whatever the problem, Dennis can shed light on the confusion easily enough. But Liz takes a more aggressive approach.
It was like bills weren't getting paid, we couldn't get balance sheets. You would ask about something and you just couldn't get the answers that you were looking for. And it made Liz very nervous.
Liz is beginning to think that the bookkeeping discrepancies might involve missing monies.
She didn't go to a lot of detail about what she was finding, but she really wanted to get to the bottom of it before she started accusing people. It was just her nature to assume that there was a reasonable explanation.
She was going to approach it in a very logical, very professional way.
At some point, she came to a conclusion that she was going to talk to the accountant about that.
On Sunday afternoon, March 2nd, 2008, Liz has a quick meeting with Dennis Gerwing. He says there's a reasonable explanation for the accounting errors.
The former accountant told Liz, I got it figured out. It's like a computer glitch, no worries. So why don't you bring John back tomorrow and have another meeting, and we'll just talk about it at that time. So she confronted him essentially by herself on that Sunday, but then was deferred to bring John back the next day to kind of hammer it all out.
The next afternoon, Monday, Liz is on her way from her office in Savannah to the next meeting she has with Dennis Gerwing at 6 p.m. As she drives, Liz calls her friend Terry McClure to have a quick chat. The topic turns to the potentially awkward meeting that Liz is about to attend with Dennis Gerwing.
And I remember kind of making a joke about her. I was like, you're gonna do this in public, aren't you? And she's like, oh yeah, there's no reason to be concerned.
While Liz and Terry talk, John Calvert is touching base with Harbor Master Nancy Kappelman before he goes off to the meeting with Gerwing.
Ended up talking to John about 4:30 on the phone, and we had planned to meet Tuesday morning.
Neither Nancy Kappelman nor Terry McClure know it, but these conversations would be the last they have with their close friends, Liz and John Calvert. The next morning of March 4th, Harbor Town is awash in sun and crisp spring air. Harbor Master Nancy Kappelman arrives at the marina to open for the day. She finds the lights inside the office are still turned on.
It's unusual, and I think it's odd, but then I think John and Liz must have worked late last night and just left the light on. And I walked in and I saw John's briefcase, which was another kind of odd thing because I'd never seen his briefcase before. And I continued on into my office, and there was the file with all the statements in it that Liz had said she and John were going to get out the night before, which was pretty unusual for them not to do something that they say they're going to do.
Nancy goes about her morning as usual, until 10 o'clock passes, without so much as a call from John Calvert. He also doesn't show up for the meeting they'd scheduled.
So I started calling him. It rang and went to their message. So I left a message, let me know when to expect you.
It appears that the Calvert cell phones are uncharacteristically turned off.
Oh, it's very unusual. They're very responsible, and they were very responsive. You could always count on them.
Nancy assumes something came up last minute for Liz and John, so she patiently waits. But as the day progresses, she becomes increasingly concerned.
We had a meeting at 4 o'clock scheduled. John would never miss that meeting. And so finally about 3:30, I just canceled the meeting.
Nancy sends an employee over to the yacht that the Calverts live aboard.
We went on the boat and went through the boat and came back and told me that there was nobody on the boat.
They do find the Calverts' cat, TC, waiting to be fed. Also, Liz's car is parked in her usual space at the marina's lot, but John's Mercedes is nowhere to be found. Have the Calverts taken an impromptu trip? It isn't like them to leave without word. Nancy starts trying to track them down.
I knew that I had to do something. I had to figure something out. I called one of Liz's associates over the law firm in Savannah to get Dave's contact information.
In Atlanta, Liz's brother, David White, is leaving work when he gets Nancy's call.
I remember it pretty vividly. It was Nancy saying, hey, have you heard from John and Liz? We're trying to track them down, or, I didn't know where exactly they were, but I just felt like, okay, no worries, I'll give them a call and left voicemail messages.
Meanwhile, Nancy calls the Calverts' former accountant, Dennis Gerwing.
I asked if he had talked to John or Liz that day, and he said no, he hadn't seen them or talked to them. So I suggested that I call the chief of security, which I did.
About 24 hours after the Calverts were last heard from, Nancy Kappelman files missing persons reports with the Beaufort County Sheriff's Office in South Carolina. In Atlanta, Georgia, David White does the same.
I met the police over at their house here in Atlanta, let them in, looked around, and they ruled that, no one had been or disturbed the house.
Like most missing adult investigations, this one is initially routine.
There was a possibility from the beginning that John and Elizabeth Calvert decided they were going to leave town and not let anybody know. There's nothing wrong with that.
This explanation sounds reasonable to Nancy Kappelman, but there's still one thing that's gnawing at her.
I didn't want to bring it up because I didn't feel like it had anything to do with it, but finally, I told them that Liz had concerns that there was some financial improprieties and the accounting. That got their interest at that point.
Coming up, the Calvert's business turns out to be in deep financial trouble.
She just said that there was a substantial amount of money missing.
A resort in Hilton Head, South Carolina, haven't been seen or heard from for about 36 hours. Police quickly locate Liz's car and her small airplane, which they find parked in its space at Hilton Head's airport. But John's car is missing.
John had a Mercedes, and it wasn't in the parking lot on Tuesday. And Wednesday morning, I drove through all the parking lots looking to see if it was anywhere around. Couldn't find it.
The Calvert's friend and colleague, Nancy Kappelman, initially thinks there's a simple but troubling explanation.
My fear was that they had gone somewhere in the car and they had had an accident.
Back at the Calvert's business, Harbor Town Yacht Basin, the Beaufort County Sheriff's Office begins to investigate.
We were about 26 hours behind. When we got the report on March 4th, it was close to 7 p.m., and the last time the Calverts had been seen were March 3rd, about 6 p.m.
Employees tell them it's possible the last person to see the Calverts is their former accountant, Dennis Gerwing. The Calverts met with him that Monday evening, March 3rd. The sheriff decides to send his investigators over the next day to have a chat with Mr. Gerwing. The next morning, investigators arrive at the club group to find Dennis Gerwing sitting in the same office where he apparently met with the Calverts 2 evenings earlier.
He seemed concerned, was basically telling us that they met and they discussed some financial issues and then they departed.
Gerwing doesn't tell detectives the exact nature of the financial issues, but he does say they stem from an earlier discussion he had with Liz Calvert about the company's financial records.
Liz was kind of put off by Dennis and told her that, I'm not going to discuss this with you alone. I'm going to discuss it with you and John together. And that's when the March 3rd meeting happened.
By the time of Gerwing's questioning, investigators already know from other sources where Liz Calvert had been shortly before the 6 o'clock meeting on March 3rd. And Gerwing seems to corroborate it.
We know that she went to the Yellow Jacket, which was their home, so to speak, here on Hilton Head. She changed clothes and went to this meeting. John had already responded to the meeting. He was with Dennis.
Gerwing says that Liz arrived at about 6:15, 15 minutes late, but the meeting only went on for another 15 minutes.
Dennis Gerwing said that Liz just said, John, come on, we gotta go, and they left. They never got to the point of discussing the issues at hand. Dennis says she didn't, express why they had to leave, and commented that saw them getting in the same car.
Gerwing says when he left for home 10 minutes later, John's Mercedes was gone, but he saw Liz's Mini still parked in his office lot, though he didn't think much of it.
He had assumed at that point that they may have left and gone to dinner.
But later, Liz's car somehow made it to its usual parking space back at Harbor Town. After leaving work, Gerwing says he took the long way home, stopping at a gas station on the way.
He said he got gas, bought a lottery ticket, and proceeded into the gated community where he lives.
As Dennis explains his comings and goings, investigators can't help but notice a cut on his right hand.
There was a few-inch laceration in the web of his right hand. It was very suspicious. He indicated that he went home after the meeting with the Calverts, and in the process of opening a wine bottle, it broke and he cut his hand.
Gerwing tells cops he went back to work, stopping by a local pharmacy, a CVS near his office, to buy Band-Aids for his cut. He says he worked till around midnight, then went back home to bed. Dennis Gerwing has lived in Hilton Head for over 20 years, has a solid reputation as an accountant, and until being questioned, has never had any run-ins with police.
Dennis Gerwing was sociable. He had a few close friends that owned local businesses and was trusted with a lot of money. He was not on the law enforcement radar at all.
Gerwing continues to cooperate by giving police consent to search his office, home, and 2 vehicles. Investigators examine his Toyota Avalon and find nothing out of the ordinary. Then they inspect Gerwing's GMC Yukon, which has just come back from a repair shop. They immediately notice that it has been thoroughly vacuumed.
When that car was examined, one of the bench seats was missing from the car. He offered the explanation that he was moving furniture. Oh, no, there's no witnesses to indicate that at all.
Police are skeptical, but do not come away with anything conclusive.
We found no evidence linking the Calverts to either of Dennis Gerwing's vehicles.
Next, an evidence team turns its sights on Gerwing's office. Although it is remarkably clean, there are no obvious red flags. At Gerwing's home, another well-kept place, officers do spot something unusual. A small pile of sandy dirt on the kitchen floor, and a freshly soiled shovel leaning against the outside of the house.
Dennis Gerwing offered the explanation that he had been doing some repair work to his irrigation system outside. Well, there was no evidence of any digging, so the investigators became suspicious that maybe this shovel and the dirt on the kitchen floor had something to do with the Calvert's disappearance. And when they checked the trash where he says he threw the wine bottle away, there was no broken bottle at all.
Adding to their suspicions is a search of Gerwing's phone records. It seems his cell phone was deactivated at around 7:30 p.m., shortly after he met with the Calverts, and powered off until 11:15 a.m. the next day, almost 16 hours later.
Why did he power off his cell phone? Did he know that we would use GPS to track his whereabouts? That were extremely obvious that something here is not right.
With so many suspicious inconsistencies, the sheriff decides within hours of the initial interview to quietly change Gerwing's status from a mere witness to a person of interest in the disappearance of Liz and John Calvert.
Investigators contacted him via phone and asked him to come back in for another interview the following day and to take a polygraph.
Gerwing asks if he's now being considered a suspect, but because police have no evidence linking him to any crime, they tell him no.
He was asked to come back for another interview just to get a few things straightened out in his statement.
Gerwing reluctantly agrees to cooperate, but that phone call would prove to be the last direct contact between him and the sheriff's office.
Dennis Gerwing retained counsel. Either that night or the next morning, the attorney called and said he wouldn't be in.
It's a huge blow to the sheriff's investigation. Although Gerwing's statements don't add up, investigators still have no evidence to implicate him in the Calvert's disappearance.
The last person known to have seen the Calverts has now clammed up and is not talking at all. So you can imagine what that did as far as the progress of the case.
Coming up, what comes next is an even bigger blow to friends and family.
I was scared. I didn't know what was going to happen with the business. I wasn't real sure where to turn.
When I learned that they had found the car, you're like, all right, maybe there's some pieces here, there's some logic to it.
It's the morning of March 6th, 2008. A little over 2 days have passed since John and Elizabeth Calvert were last seen by their former accountant. Dennis Gerwing. At first, he agrees to help with the investigation, but then he hires a lawyer and cancels a polygraph exam.
And that really hurt or hindered our investigation because, again, the last person to see the Calverts made himself inaccessible to us.
Meanwhile, the Calverts' friends and family hold a tenuous vigil, hoping they will get some answers if police can find a silver Mercedes.
There was a car that was missing. John's car was, they didn't know where that was.
Although the Calverts have only been missing a short time, Liz's brother David White says their business, Harbortown, is already starting to founder.
They were the only ones that had the ability to financially move this business along. So all of a sudden, I was confronted with, what do we do with the business? We can't pay bills, we can't, pay salary.
I was scared. I was scared. I didn't know what happened to them. I didn't know what was going to happen to us.
David jumps into the fray, hoping to keep Harbortown afloat while employees work overtime.
We were putting up posters. We were trying to talk to everyone we could think of to talk to.
Local news outlets search for the Calverts as well, plastering the affluent couple's image over front pages and TV screens. Savannah, Georgia TV reporter Holly Bounds has never seen such media interest.
Typically, an everyday news story, it'll be your 3 local TV stations and 2 newspapers, max. This one, we had all national television stations there, and I think that the sheriff's office was just in an absolute overload.
We were getting calls, I saw a silver Mercedes, or I saw this, or I saw that, and we were tracking those leads down as they came in.
The Beaufort County Sheriff's Office is coordinating its largest search effort in recent history.
We utilized every resource that we had available to us. We utilized South Carolina Wildlife Department, South Carolina DNR, Department of Natural Resources. We had the FBI involved early on, and SLED, State Law Enforcement Division, including the local Hilton Head Island Fire Department for some man searches.
Late into the night of March 6th, these efforts finally pay off. While canvassing parking lots, deputies find John Calvert's silver Mercedes. It's parked at a hotel the Calverts never checked into, and it's 6 miles away from where it was last seen.
It appeared that someone had driven into the parking lot and found the first space available, got out of it and left. That vehicle had been taken there by a single occupant because there were coffee cups and other things that were on the passenger seat.
When I learned that they had found the car, you're like, all right, maybe there's some pieces here, there's some logic to it.
The forensics team, they process with chemicals, they look for fibers, hairs, anything that would put somebody in that car. And we found no evidence that would indicate any criminal activity linking Dennis Gerwing to that car. It was just a natural-looking car.
Without any blood, DNA, or fingerprints that would indicate foul play, investigators are back to square one.
It didn't solve any mysteries. It actually created a mystery for us as how the car got there.
And the Calverts' loved ones can no longer hold out hope that the Mercedes was taken on a road trip. With more questions than answers, authorities redouble their efforts to check accountant Dennis Gerwing's movements after he met with the Calverts. What stands out immediately is Gerwing's claim that he visited a CVS drugstore after he cut his hand.
His explanation for the cut was that when he was opening a bottle of wine, it broke and it cut his hand. And then he went to the CVS to buy some Band-Aids.
The pharmacy's cash register and surveillance video show that Dennis Gerwing did in fact buy Band-Aids the night of March 3rd. Except it happened at 7:15 p.m., almost 3 hours earlier than he claimed.
Of course, he left out the fact that he went in, bought some Band-Aids, went back out to the parking lot, came back in and bought some latex gloves.
Gerwing had never mentioned any latex gloves during his statements to police. and investigators never found any in his cars, home, or office. Now it's becoming evident to police that Gerwing may be trying to hide something. But soon, investigators do find a clue that Gerwing couldn't possibly hide. Video surveillance from the front of a restaurant next to Gerwing's office the night the Calverts went missing.
It was apparent that Dennis Gerwing was pacing back and forth in the late evening and early morning hours of March 3rd and 4th.
Police dogs have already sniffed for signs of the Calverts at that spot, as well as other areas behind Gerwing's office building. Faced with no solid evidence to implicate Gerwing, investigators weigh their options.
I think when we got to the point where the purchase of the latex gloves was made, we had established enough probable cause to search for any evidence that would help us determine what led to the disappearance of the Calverts.
On March 8th, the sheriff's office executes search warrants, returning once again to Gerwing's home, office, and cars.
But instead of just doing a look around, we did a search for any forensic evidence. Nothing was found. Zilch.
Coming up, police can't pin anything on Gerwing, but soon, a promising new lead emerges.
The last phone call he made that night was to the only witness to the planning.
Suspicion of foul play in the disappearance of Elizabeth and John Calvert. Police turn up the heat, hoping to implicate the couple's former associate, Dennis Gerwing. But because he stopped cooperating, investigators turn to Gerwing's associates and friends for clues.
All the people that were associated with Dennis Gerwing were investigated, were talked to, were polygraphed. And there were so many different opinions of Dennis Gerwing that we discovered during the investigation.
Most never imagined Dennis Gerwing, of all people, could be involved in foul play. But some indicate that the lifelong bachelor was no Boy Scout either.
Some of his social habits were questionable. He had some dealings with some extremely shady people that came out during the investigation.
Except for a gambling habit and frequent sightings at a local strip club, police don't learn anything new about Gerwing's activities before the Calverts went missing. But the next day, cops get the kind of information they've been waiting for. One week after the Calverts met with their former accountant, Captain Bob Bromage brings in a young woman named Shaha, who is Dennis Gerwing's assistant, for questioning. She is the last person that Dennis Gerwing called on the evening the Calverts disappeared. According to phone records, Gerwing made that phone call after buying the Band-Aids and leaving the CVS pharmacy, and just before he went back in to purchase those latex gloves.
The last phone call Dennis Gerwing made on March 3rd was to Shaha, his employee, the only witness to his planning that afternoon.
At the sheriff's office, Shaha tells investigators that a few hours before Gerwing called her, he asked that she follow him to the Hilton Head Airport so he could leave his Toyota Avalon there. While she followed him to the airport, Gerwing made a brief stop at his house.
She says he went in for a minute or two, came out with nothing.
Shaha says afterward Gerwing then drove to the airport, dropped off his car, and then left with her.
His explanation to her was that he had friends coming into town.
On their way back to work, Shaha says Gerwing instructed her to stop at the Graco hardware store.
She said he went in and bought some tablecloths or something, so we went back to Graco and found the receipts for the purchase, found Dennis on video purchasing 3 very large industrial strength drop cloths.
Shaha asked what the cloths were for. Gerwing replied he was in the middle of a painting project.
Friends and close associates of Gerwing said he was not the kind of guy to do a lot of manual labor. He wouldn't be doing painting.
Shaha says later at the office, around 5:30 p.m., Gerwing asked her to go to Harbortown to pick up some reports at the Calverts' office. When she left, she saw John Calvert arriving for the meeting.
It was apparent that Dennis Gerwing was going to ensure that he was at the office alone.
He sent her on a mission, then called her and said, don't come back to the office. We can take care of it in the morning.
But Shaha says the next day at work, March 4th, the morning passed without any sign of her boss. She says Gerwing finally showed up at around 1 in the afternoon, making no mention about why he was late. But he did ask her for one more favor, to pick him up at home the next morning and take him to the shop where his GMC was repaired. That next morning, Wednesday, March 5th, Shaha picked up Gerwing at his home. She noticed his Toyota Avalon was now back in his driveway. Cops can't figure out who drove it there.
The car was originally at the airport, but we don't have any evidence that anybody came into the airport to visit Dennis Gerwing. Well, nobody else was at his house.
As investigators mull over Shaha's story, they keep coming back to Gerwing and those 3 drop cloths.
These are commercial grade, 9-foot by 12-foot drop cloths that would certainly keep blood or any other hair or fiber evidence from getting in the vehicle if, let's say, the bodies were wrapped up in these drop cloths and they were secured.
By the end of March 10th, with so much circumstantial evidence now pointing to Dennis Gerwing, investigators are ready to publicly name him as a person of interest in the Calvert's disappearance. The announcement will be made on the next day, March 11th, the same day a prayer vigil is planned for the Calverts. Coming up, an emotional gathering of the Calverts' family and friends.
To see that vigil come together, I was crying pretty hard.
But then, shocking news.
It started unraveling at that point, like there's some serious stuff going on here.
2008. 8 days after Liz and John Calvert mysteriously vanished, family and friends are planning a candlelight vigil for later in the day. But this morning, the Beaufort County Sheriff has plans of his own to make an announcement about the last known person to see the Calverts, their former accountant, Dennis Gerwing.
We were doing a press release indicating that Dennis Gerwing was a person of interest.
How will Gerwing respond? The sheriff's about to find out. In the hours before the Calvert's prayer vigil, Hilton Head Emergency Dispatch gets a 911 call from Dennis Gerwing's attorney. He's been trying to get in touch with his client since the day before, and Gerwing isn't answering.
Dennis was living in a townhome or a condo, if you will, because his home was being cleaned because we had done a thorough search with a search warrant of his home, and so he was staying in one of the units that he manages while that was being done.
Firefighters gain entry, and investigators are shocked by a grisly scene. Gerwing had locked himself in the bathroom of the master suite.
It was pretty violent. There was a lot of blood on the walls, on the floors, sinks and bathtub.
There was 360 degrees of blood in that bathroom.
In the tub, Dennis Gerwing's naked body lies lifeless, riddled with knife wounds.
Penetrating his thighs, his legs, his wrist, his neck, his throat.
As forensic technicians process the crime scene, darkness falls at Harbortown, and a candlelight vigil honoring Liz and John Calvert is held.
It was under the Liberty Oak Tree, which is very special to John and Liz. Not only did they invest in it, personally, but John actually asked Liz to marry him here.
To see that vigil come together, I was crying pretty hard, and I got a phone call at the vigil that, the former accountant had committed suicide. And that just doesn't, set up a good scenario for what really had happened to Liz and John.
Police ruled Dennis Gerwing's death as suicide, based on the weapon, a bloody steak knife found sitting next to Gerwing's right hand, a handwritten note next to the bathroom sink, and handwriting scrawled on a bedsheet in the adjoining bedroom.
Of course, your hopes are up that the notes are going to include something that's going to lead us in the right direction. But it gave us nothing. But it did tell us something, though, that Dennis Gerwing knew that he was a person of interest. He was a suspect in John and Liz's missing. He never took an opportunity to say, I had nothing to do with, with the missing couple. He did, in fact, in the suicide note, claim that everything that happened at SPC.
SPC is Sea Pines Center, the office complex where the Calverts last met with Dennis Gerwing. Police searched the club group there again, for a third time, and still cannot find a speck of evidence or trace of blood. But another forensic investigation and Gerwing's club group partner do provide some answers.
Dennis Gerwing discussed with his partner the day before the suicide a forensic audit.
The audit is quite revealing. It shows that Gerwing embezzled about $2.1 million from his clients. He took over $200,000 from the Calverts alone, and Liz Calvert was apparently onto it.
Liz was very smart, and I think she'd started seeing some signs of this as much as 6 months prior, and she wasn't gonna let it go.
An email Dennis Gerwing wrote to a friend spells out his feelings about Elizabeth Calvert.
He referred to her as a viper. They didn't get along, and she had discovered some financial issues with their accounts and made Dennis uncomfortable. I mean, he knew then that it wouldn't take long for her to figure out that there were some money issues here.
Elizabeth was tough. And she was on to Dennis Gerwing. She was on to Dennis Gerwing, and it scared Dennis Gerwing. I don't think there's any question about it. He knew that he would be going to prison.
Even if Gerwing were alive today, police still lack enough evidence to actually implicate him in Liz and John Calvert's disappearance. Analysis of that soil found on his kitchen floor fails to geographically pinpoint a possible burial site. And investigators still can't figure out Gerwing's whereabouts after he was seen pacing on closed-circuit television near his office the night of March 3rd, the same night the Calverts went missing. Today, rumors abound about what really happened to Dennis Gerwing and to the Calverts.
When we're talking about Dennis Gerwing, there are folks who believe he did not take his own life. Then there are people who have their own theories about the Calverts. Maybe the witness protection program, that they're out just enjoying life somewhere else and they're getting away. Then there are folks who think Dennis Gerwing killed them.
The sheriff's office says there was never any reason to believe the Calverts were placed into witness protection. But to be sure, they check with federal authorities, who confirm there's no basis for the theory.
We know that their credit cards haven't been used. Their bank accounts haven't been accessed. We have both of their passports. Their cell phones haven't been recovered. Their cell phones haven't been turned on.
After a $65,000 reward for clues went unclaimed, the money is now being donated to college scholarship funds in the Calverts' names. But police still search for anyone with information or a connection to the Calverts' disappearance.
We're hopeful that we will someday get a phone call or something that will bring closure to this investigation, because the family members, obviously highly upset with no closure. You can't imagine their anxiety.
On October 22, 2009, a court order declares the Calverts legally deceased, a formality that allows their business, Harbor Town, now managed by Liz's brother David, to continue running. But it's little comfort for friends and family.
I think for me, the hardest part is just not having John and Liz here. That the working with them, the leadership, the guidance, they were close to family to us.
Liz was